So, have you ever wondered why a year can feel like an eternity when you're a kid, but then, as an adult, a whole decade just seems to poof, disappear? Well, today, we're going to unpack the real science behind that feeling.
Okay, let's just start here. Seriously, think back to being a kid. The final school bell rings, and you've got this endless summer stretching out in front of you. It just felt like a whole separate lifetime was about to begin, right?
And now, you probably catch yourself saying stuff like, wait, it's October already? Or, how have 5 years gone by? Well, here's the thing. That's not just you being nostalgic. It is a real, measurable phenomenon that's actually happening inside your brain.
So, we're going to investigate this mystery. We're going to look at 3 key clues: the simple math of our lives, the huge difference between new things versus routine, and, believe it or not, the actual chemistry of our brain's internal clock.
So, our first clue is surprisingly simple. It really all comes down to proportion. This isn't about the clock on the wall, it's about the calendar of your life.
Think about it this way. When you're 5 years old, one single year is a massive 20% of your entire life. Every single day, every week is this huge, significant chunk of everything you've ever experienced. That's why waiting for your birthday feels like an absolute eternity.
Okay, now let's fast forward. For someone who's 40, 1 year is a much smaller slice of the pie. Just 2.5% of their life so far. It's the same 365 days, but compared to everything else they've lived through, it just feels way less significant.
And that's really the whole point here. Our brain doesn't have some perfect internal stopwatch. It measures time relative to the total amount of time it's already known. So as we get older, each new year becomes a smaller and smaller fraction of our own personal history, which makes it feel like it's flying by.
All right, so that's the math part. But let's dig into our second clue, which takes us from simple fractions into the really fascinating world of how we make memories. This is where we see how new experiences can literally stretch our perception of time.
You know, childhood is just this relentless stream of firsts. Your brain is constantly in overdrive recording all this rich, detailed information because, well, everything's new. But as an adult, we build routines. The same commute, the same job, the same weekend chores. They all become familiar, and our brains just don't have to work as hard to process them anymore.
And this actually has a name. It's called the novelty effect. See, when you do something new, your brain pays way more attention. It's processing more data, creating thicker, more detailed memories. And later, when we look back, our brain sees all that dense information and interprets it as a longer period of time.
It's just like the psychologist Matt Johnson says, routine is the total opposite. Our brain basically hits the compress button on all those familiar events. Your daily drive to work doesn't get its own unique memory file, it just gets squished together with all the others. And that compression is what makes weeks and months and even years feel like they just blur together.
Okay, there's this researcher, Adrian Bijan, who has a brilliant analogy for this. Think of your life as a flip book. The childhood flip book is packed with unique, detailed drawings on every single page, right? So the story feels long and full. But the adult flip book, it just reuses the same few drawings over and over again. The book is still moving forward, but the story just seems to be over much faster.
Now for our third and final clue. We're going deep inside the brain to look at the actual neurochemistry that acts as our internal timekeeper. It turns out our perception of time is also tied to one specific chemical. And that chemical is dopamine. We usually hear about it as the reward molecule, but it's also absolutely critical for our attention span and, you guessed it, for how our brain marks the passage of time. And here's the kicker. As we get older, our dopamine levels naturally start to decline, which directly affects our internal clock.
And check this out, because there's actual data to back this up. In one study, they asked people to just close their eyes and mentally count to 120 seconds. The youngest group, pretty darn accurate. They averaged about 115 seconds. But look at the oldest group. They felt that 120 seconds had passed when, in reality, it had only been 87 seconds.
This shows the dopamine effect perfectly. With lower dopamine, your brain's internal clock actually ticks slower. So when that older group was asked to count out 120 seconds, their slower internal timer only reached that number after 87 real seconds had passed. And because their internal clock is slower, the external world, the actual clock on the wall, seems to be moving much faster by comparison.
Okay, so we've got the math against us, fewer new experiences, and our brain chemistry is changing. It all sounds a bit inevitable, doesn't it? But is it? Can we actually do anything to slow things down?
Well, the answer, and this is the great part, is yes. If routine is the enemy of time, then the solution is to consciously fight back and bring novelty back into our lives.
The trick is to just give your brain new frames to record. And this doesn't mean you have to quit your job and go travel the world. It can be as simple as trying to learn a new skill, taking a different route on your daily walk, trying a food you've never had before, or even just listening to a new album on your commute. Every single new experience forces your brain to wake up, pay attention, and create a brand new memory.
I love how Professor Cindy Lustig puts it. She says, routine is the enemy of expanding your time. The more you can shake things up, the more your brain has to record, and the longer and fuller your life is going to feel when you look back.
So, after looking at the math, the memories, and the molecules, what's the big picture here? What's the takeaway? The fundamental thing to remember is this. The clock on the wall is ticking at the same speed for everyone. Time itself isn't accelerating. What's changing is our internal, subjective experience of it.
And honestly, that's incredibly empowering. It means we actually have some control here. To make our lives feel richer and more expansive, the answer is to actively seek out the new, to stay curious, and to give our brains a reason to stop and pay attention.
You know, in the end, our life is kind of like a film that our brain is editing. We can't stop the reel from running, but we can choose to add more scenes, more cuts, and more color. And that's how we make sure the final story feels like a long, memorable epic, not just a short film we watched on fast forward.